A short while ago, we were working on the stock sale pseudocode and flowchart solution, which you see up on the screen here, which was featured in the previous video. And our task in class right now is to actually build the application that goes with this. So we're going to go into Visual Studio and we're going to start building a Windows form application. And then I'm also going to talk about what the next step is for this application as we near the end of that. All right, so keeping the pseudocode and flowchart in mind here, I'm going to go ahead and launch Visual Studio. And you should do the same. I am using Visual Studio 2015. And I close the start page. That's kind of a habit of mine. Whenever I launch Visual Studio, it's the first thing I do. You don't have to do that. It's just this habit I've gotten into over the years. I usually prefer to use the actual menus up at the top of the screen to build projects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the File menu, and then I'm going to say New Project. And this will mimic what we were doing last week. We want to make sure that we're using the Visual Basic Language. We want to make sure that we're looking at Windows applications. And then we also want to make sure that we choose a Windows Forms application, making sure that that language is Visual Basic. I'm actually going to go ahead and give it a name right off the bat. I mean, since we're building a stock sale program, why don't we call it stock sale? And then I'm going to go ahead and say OK. One thing that's important to note from what I just did up here on the screen, this application is not actually saved yet. It hasn't been saved to a location on the hard drive. All I've done is declare a name for the project. So the first time you go to hit either the Save button or the Save All button, you're going to get an additional dialog, and I'll talk about that. But before I proceed, I'm going to take a pause here in class just a moment. Well, everybody here in class was successful at getting to this point, which is a good step. It wasn't quite so easy last week because we had people that were freshly installing Visual Studio, working in a combination of their own equipment and school equipment and version issues. But at this point, once you get Visual Studio up and running and it's there on your machine, that part becomes pretty painless. All right, so we do have a form up on the screen. I think that what would be a really good place to start is maybe changing the name of the form and maybe also putting something useful up here in the title bar of the form. Now, if you remember how to do that, we would come over to our properties window here. And if you recall from the last session, there's in the properties window, there's just a couple little buttons here, the first couple on the toolbar. And these allow you to basically sort the properties that are attached to any object either alphabetically or by category. My preference personally, as I usually work in the alphabetical mode, because I know the things I'm looking for and I can find them faster. But you might find the other mode useful for yourself. But if you're following along with what I'm doing here in class, I would suggest that you click on the alphabetical button, which I just did. So the first thing I'm going to click on is actually the field that's already highlighted, which is the text field. I'm going to click on the right-hand column where it says Form 1. And I'm actually going to put in stock sale profit or something like that. If you just want to call it stock sale, that's fine. Now this is just plain text that's going to appear in the title up here. So as soon as I'm done typing what I need, I can either press enter or the tab key or click off of it somewhere else on the screen and it'll lock into place if you haven't discovered that already. And then you can see up here in the title bar it says stock sale profit. All right. Now we haven't saved this yet, right? Remember I was saying that? So now that we've actually done something, I'm going to get us all to save. Be in the habit of using the Save All button, which is a little icon up in the toolbar there where it's got two little diskettes instead of just the one. Because what happens in a Visual Basic program is many times you'll have multiple tabs open, and when you hit the big save icon, it only saves the one that you're working on currently, not all of them. you hit the save all, anything that's open, it will save. And I think that's just smarter and safer. Now, the very first time we do it, we're going to get a dialog that looks like this. It looks a little bit different than what you would normally get, because if you've already saved the project, you hit the save all, and it just does it in the background, and nothing comes back at you on the screen. But the very first time, it's actually going to prompt us to figure out where we want to store it. Now, if you look at my file path here, I always store all my school stuff in my Google Drive, which runs resident on my machine. And then I created a folder for this class, and then a folder for the summer semester. Yes? Okay. The discussion that we're having here in class, if you're curious, because I'm sure you guys can't hear it in the recording, is if you're using Visual Studio 2017, this interface is a little bit different. In other words, it does this step actually when you first create the software, as opposed to when you go to the first save. The dialog is essentially the same. It has you pick a location to store it. What I want you to be cautious about is just to know where it's placed. Visual Studio does have a default save location, which is usually in your Documents folder, inside of a Visual Studio Projects folder, and then by name of project inside separate folders. That doesn't have to be the default location. That might work fine for you, but if you're working here on a school machine, obviously that's going to be problematic. But file management always is important, folks, and knowing where your stuff is going is important. And remember, from last week, I've been telling you at this point in your development careers, if you want to look at it that way, you can actually leave this box unchecked, create directory for solution. If you happen to check it, what it does is it creates a folder inside the folder you're creating with the same name. So it's like it's 2 layers deep, and then in between those 2 folders it puts what they call a solution file, which points to all the project resources. That's typically only useful if you have multiple forms on an application. Most of the stuff we're going to do here is only going to have one form, so it doesn't make sense to create folders within folders. So that's why I tell people to uncheck it if you're curious. Either way, it'll work just fine. So if you checked it and clicked OK or save already, not a big deal. But I leave mine unchecked. I'm going to go ahead and say save. All right. The next step is we're going to learn another real important concept here. This concept is called a clean build. In other words, I haven't really done anything in the program yet, but what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run the program. Is it going to do anything? No, it's just going to put an empty window up on the screen. So I hit my start button, and it brought up a blank window. But unbeknownst to you, being new to this environment, what's happened is Visual Studio takes the code that forms the window and builds into the project all the resources, all the binary files, the dynamic linking libraries. You guys don't even know what that stuff means yet, but basically a bunch of resources that are automatically built with every project. They are pre-built and already present. So the next time we go to compile the program, it will be much faster. And we have a clean starting point so that if we have a problem with our code, we have a spot to go back to. All right. I'm hitting the X in the corner there to stop it, or you can hit the little stop button up here in the toolbar. And I just want to point out what I'm referring to when I do a clean build and all the resources that it adds. Over here on the right-hand side, there's a real important part of the development environment called the Solution Explorer. And I alluded to the fact last time that it's kind of like a file manager, but not really. And really what this is, in the default mode that we're looking at it now, it shows a list of all the project resources. So you can see on the right-hand side here the form that we've built. And notice it's called Form 1, that matches our tab. And then notice that it's got a little expander triangle next to it on the left-hand side. If you click on that, you're going to see what's attached to this actual file. Form1.vb is a Visual Basic file. Underneath it, there's text. And then inside there are objects that are part of the program. Right now, all of it we've created on Form 1 is the form itself. But if I went ahead and clicked on it, you see it jumps into code mode right away. But it also, if you expand it, it has some, I didn't put this stuff in here. Where did this stuff come from? This is stuff that Visual Studio puts in there automatically. Do you have to worry about this stuff? No. But when you get really advanced in your programming skills, there's times when you go into some of these files and you adjust them and tweak them, or you try to solve problems with them. And anytime that we are going to add something to our form, this list here will grow. So if I had a button, there'll be a button object in there. If I had code itself, the code appears here. So I think that hopefully that makes a little bit of sense to you. Now I'm going to come back up here and I'm going to actually close the form VB code. I don't want to see the code. I just want to see the design mode. That's all we need right now. And I'm also going to collapse the triangle here. The Solution Explorer is kind of an interesting interface in that you have a few different modes you can be in. The default mode is that object mode where it shows you the objects that are within your program. But it also has this little icon here. Can you see that? That says show all files. And if I click on that, it reveals to you all the things that you're not seeing in the background. Basically what it's revealing to you are the things that are included in every application that you build, right? In one of the earlier classes, I gave you one of my standard programming stories, like back in my day, right, when I used to write applications in school, and we learned to write windowed applications. We'd have to write the code for the window first, and then write the code for the application. Right? And you guys don't have to do that, but it doesn't mean that the code for the window isn't there. What I just did by clicking the show all files is show you all these folders that were hidden before. There's a bin folder, that's where the binary files, the compiled files go, and an object folder where some of the things that we're building with are either pre-built or exist, and then we pull them into the application, including the basic structure for a window. And then every time I add a button or a text field or something like that, those components get added into those folders. You don't even see it, but you can work with the object. And those things are created with code, but Visual Studio does it for us automatically. So I'm actually going to click that button again to hide those things because we just don't need to see them. But I do want you to be aware that they're there. Okay? All right, so now we have our window. Okay, now what? Well, I better look at my pseudocode, right? And what I'm seeing here is it says, get the purchase price and get the selling price. Now that sounds a lot like what we were doing last week, right? A couple fields for length and width for the fertilizer problem. So I think maybe a couple labels and a couple of text boxes. What do you think? All right, let's do that. If your toolbox is not visible on the left-hand side of the screen, you guys are going to want to go up to the View menu and then select Toolbox, and then it will pop up. While you're building the form, it might actually be a good idea to use this push pin. And you can see I clicked it and it went to auto hide. But when the push pin is sitting sideways, that means when I move off of it and do something else, it jumps back to the margin. But if you want it to sit there while you're building stuff, just click that push pin and it'll stick it into that spot. If you mistakenly click the X, which I guarantee you're bound to do at least a few times, remember, just go to the View menu and choose Toolbox. And then if you're really clever, you can even look at the keyboard shortcut that would just bring it back automatically, which is Control-Alt-X. I never use it, but maybe you will. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click this second expander box here in the Common Controls area, and that's where we're going to pull our tools in. So remember, I wanted to create a couple of labels, and actually I want you to watch the pattern in which I add this stuff to the screen, okay? First I'm going to add a label, and that's going to be a prompt for getting the purchase price, and then I'm going to add the text box that goes with it, and then I'm going to add a label that's going to prompt for the selling price and a text box where we can enter it. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start naming the objects using the conventions that we learned last week and changing the text that's on the screen. So let's start with the first one. I'll click on the first label, and I think this one will say input. You know, I don't even have to say input, honestly. I could just say purchase price. Purchase price of stock. You can see that made it look a little messy, so I'm just coming over here and moving it. I'm going to click back onto that label so it's highlighted, and then in the properties window, I'm going to scroll up to the top. And there I will find the name field. And you remember the three-letter prefix things that we were working with? What's the prefix for a label? Yep, LBL. So in lowercase letters, LBL. And then I'm going to say purchase. I might even say label purchase price. I might even do the whole thing. All right, then I'm going to click on the text box next to it, and all I'm going to change there is the name. This is a text box, so what's the prefix? Yes, TXT. And then I'm going to say purchase price. And notice I'm being kind of verbose with the naming of it. Because that way when I look at that name in my code, I'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's going to be the text box for the purchase price. Very clear. I'm going to press Tab to get out of that field and lock it in. Now I'm going to do the same procedures with the second label. So this one, for the text field, I'm going to say selling price of stock. At the top of the properties window, scrolling up, I'm going to name it LBL selling price. I'm going to come over to the form now, and I'm going to just tweak this a little bit so it fits nicer. It's all lined up. And while that box is highlighted, I'm going to change the name of that box to TXT selling price. And then press enter to lock it in. If you haven't done it for a little while, hit the Save All button. This is not Microsoft Word. It will not autosave, folks. Right? So if you do a whole bunch of work, haven't saved, the battery dies in your laptop, you can imagine the rest, I'm sure. All right, I'm going to go back to my pseudocode now. All right, so get the purchase price, get the selling price, and this step looks like math. So this is a processing step. That we'll do when we code. This is a processing step. And then we also need to have somewhere to display the profit and the commission and the selling price. Well, let me ask you this. Do we really need to display the selling price? Because they typed it in, right? Okay, so that's one that we really, I guess we don't really need to do that, right? Oops, I don't want to delete the whole line. And I'll put that in parentheses. Because now the reality of building the application is, I really don't need to redisplay this because it's already displayed. Right? So we do need to display the profit and the commission, and we can take that output and put it in a few different places. And last week what we learned is that we can take the output and we can put it back into a text box, right? All right, so that's one way to do it. But guess what? I'm going to show you a different way to do it. You can also take the output and put it into a label. So let's try doing that. Sound like fun? All right. So follow my steps here. I'm going to create a label. I'm going to drop it onto the form here. I'm going to straighten that one out. And this label is going to describe the output. And then I'm going to create another label next to it that's going to contain the output. Then I'm going to repeat that process one more time. Another label and another place to do output. And I'll clean them up later. One more thing I can think of is why don't we put a button on there to make the program run, right? Calculate button or execute button, something like that. So let's do that right away too. And we'll just drop that at the bottom of the form, and then we'll clean it up later. All right, so let's now start to adjust these things a little bit. I'm going to move my labels around and try to line them up a little. So with this first label, once again, I'm going to start to name it. And what I'm going to place in this label is profit. So I'm going to label and I'm going to be really careful here because I'm going to have one label that's going to say, hey, this is the profit, and the other one that actually contains the profit. So now I'm like thinking about this, and I might just call this profit display. No, that's not good either. You guys are copying me. You're like, oh no, he's changing his mind. I'm trying to think about label profit. Maybe description is a good word. So I'm just going to maybe shorten that to like DESC. And then you'll see what my rationale is here as I move forward. I'm also going to scroll down here, and I'm going to change the text to say total profit earned. All right. Now I'm going to move over to this other label here on the right-hand side, and this one, I'm going to come up to the top first and change the name of it. And this one's actually going to be LBL profit, and I'm going to say output. So I know this is actually where the output's going to go. Then I'm going to scroll down once again to the text field. And you know what I'm going to do with this text? I'm going to just delete it. So what's going to happen if I delete it is that label is kind of disappearing also. You see that? Right now I'm still on it, so I can actually see the handle for it, like a little bit of an outline there. But as soon as I click off of it, and you guys should be aware of this, did it disappear? No, it's still there. If you want to find it again, you can kind of like hunt and peck for it, or if you just click and drag a selection around about where it is, you can find it again, just in case you need to do something with it. All right, now I'm going to repeat that process for the things here on the bottom. So total profit earned, and then this one will be for commission. And I'm trying to remember what I called this one. You call this one profit description. So we'll call this one LBL commission. I'll abbreviate description. I pressed enter. And then I'm going to scroll down again to the bottom and find that text field. And then from here, I'm going to change that to say commission paid. And I might actually even include in there, maybe even include the 2% in there. Why not? Right? 2% commission paid. That's a pretty good descriptor, I think. And then finally, I'm going to click on this last label. and I'm going to give it a name. This one's going to be LBL commission output. And then, like I did with the previous label, I'm going to delete the text. All right, we got another object on the screen to name and place text into, and that's the button. Do you remember the naming convention for button? As I type it in? Yeah, BTN. And I'm just going to call this calculate. And we'll be creating a lot of button calculates as we start out in our programming endeavors, because that's what most of them are going to do, is simple math typically. And then I'm going to change the text, of course, to say something more useful, like calculate, or execute, or whatever you think is cool. All right, now I'm going to just take a little bit of time here to just kind of straighten things out a little bit, make sure they're lined up. I'm going to draw a selection to see if I can find my other two labels, and I'm going to move them if I can. See how difficult it is to move them after they contain nothing? The other thing you should know is, I don't know if you see them moving right now without my mouse being near them. Once they're highlighted, you can use your arrow keys to move stuff around too. Something handy to know. All right, I think one last thing I'm going to put on here. I'm going to create one more label, and I'm going to put that right up here at the top. And I'm just going to call this one, this is my title basically, so I'm going to go LBL title. And let's figure out some text that can go in there, like stock sale profit calculator. And then because it is a title, I think that it would probably be very helpful if we scroll up here in the properties and maybe at the very least just change the size of the font. So I'm going to click the little expander here in the properties and maybe bump that up to like a 12 or a 14. Maybe even make it bold. So change bold from false to true. I think that looks okay. And then I'm just going to do some final tweaks here. The calculate button doesn't look very centered to me, so I'm going to move it over. And then all this stuff down here looks like it could slide down a little bit. So you see how I'm highlighting all of it together? And then I can move it all together, which is kind of cool. And then I'm going to click off of that to deselect it. And I'm going to do a save all because it's been a little while. All right, let's make sure there's no problems with anything we have so far. There really shouldn't be, but I'm once again going to hit the start button and run the program. There's no code yet that we've coded, so nothing should crash or fail, hopefully. So I'm going to hit that start button, and there it is. Looks pretty good. We know that if I click calculate, what's going to happen? Absolutely nothing, because we didn't tell it to do anything yet. But we can close it. That was fun. All right, folks, I'm going to take a short break here. All right, we took a break here in class, and now we're back, and we're going to start working on the code part. Now, the way that we're going to get to the code, and if you guys remember this from last time, the code that we're going to write is going to attach itself to this button. In order to pre-create the event handler, and that's what they call it, that will react to the button click, all you have to do is double click the object itself. So I'm going to actually double click the calculate button, and then it drops us into the code view, and at the same time pre-creates this code right here. If yours happens to say something other than like button, calculate, click, then maybe you want to raise your hand. I'll come over and see what you did. Because basically, okay, we got one. We got one winner. But basically what happens is if you end up double clicking, let's say you miss the button and you double click on the form itself, or you double click on a label or something like that, it will generate a piece of code that responds to the default action for whatever that object is. If, let's say, you double clicked on the form by mistake, and I'll do it just to show you what happens, so not on any of the objects in the screen, but just the form itself, it creates a subroutine, basically what it is, that reacts to the form loading. Now, I don't need that. Now, you know what's really cool about it is all I have to do is highlight that and delete it, and it's okay. No harm done. If you do get into the code view and you have stuff in there you don't need that was accidentally created, feel free to do that, but just remember that when you're doing it, that you get rid of the whole thing, including the beginning of it where it says private sub and end sub and everything in between. Now I'm actually going to delete the thing I just created. It's not a big deal. It's just text. Didn't break anything. But the other tip here is don't get rid of the thing at the top which says public class form and end class, because that is what holds the whole program. So those have to stay there. All right. I'm going to go back to the form, the visual view of the form, and this time I'm going to click on the button, make sure it's highlighted, and then double click. And then when I go back to the form, that code should be there. So right now I'm going to give it a pause, and I'm going to come around the room and just make sure you guys are all good. All right? Okay. Looks like everybody here has got it up and running. Okay, we took care of any tiny little issues that we had. And now we do have some code. I do want to encourage you at this point, if you're all good with getting this stuff up on the screen like this, to go ahead and hit your Save All button and make sure you don't lose your work. The other thing that you can do if you'd like is, at this point, I'm not really going to be using the toolbox for buttons and labels and things like that, right? I'm kind of done with that part of it for now. I'm actually going to unclick the push pin and let it drop back off to the side, and then it gives me more room to look at the code. All right, what I'm going to do is, to start with, I'm actually just going to create a little bit of space inside the code window here. And notice what Visual Studio does as you're working. Notice in the left-hand margin how there's like green and yellow. It's kind of indicating to you if it's checked the code and it's okay. Green means it's checked it and it's fine. The yellow, well, what's wrong with the empty space? Well, there's nothing wrong with it. I just haven't saved it. So if I hit save again, that should turn green. If I hit save again, and like we had up here in the front of the room, you got a whole bunch of error messages fly up and things are underlined and boxes are popping up. You probably got some sort of a problem, and we'll figure it out. All right? But never go into panic mode with this stuff, folks. Code is always fixable. You're not breaking anything. Just remember that. And there's always a way to rescue it. Okay, so I just created a little bit of space here for myself. Now I am going back to my pseudocode because that's kind of the heart of my application. All right, well, we set up a provision for getting the purchase price and the selling price. And you know what? I'm looking at the pseudocode and I'm thinking to myself, you know what? We learned about this problem-solving thing, and we learned about how software works, and there's some key steps in doing software. And one of the key things is, and there's method to my madness here, believe it or not, how these things break down into categories. So for example, the first couple of steps are actually the input part, right? We're asking the user for input. The part where we do the math based on that input is called processing. And then when we're all done, we provide some sort of output to show that things work correctly. Now, one thing that you might find handy in your code when we first start out, and then, it's up to you if you want to do this or not, is you can actually put comments into your code to kind of indicate those steps. Okay? And I'm going to do that as I go, and it's kind of like a way to basically annotate your work, to kind of put little markers inside your code that show you what's happening at that point in time. That doesn't actually affect the code, but is information for you. Generally speaking, in a Visual Basic program, if you want to throw a comment into your code, you use an apostrophe and then type something. And you notice how it turns green? What I just typed will not affect anything within the program, but it's information for me. And I just put an apostrophe, and then anything that follows turns into a comment. You want to do it on a blank line, though. What I might actually do here, even if it seems kind of silly, is I'm probably going to create some comments, and one's going to say input. I move down a little bit. Processing. Down a little bit. Output. And I'm kind of like, you're kind of building it into pieces. Another thing that is not a bad idea, when you are working with pseudocode that becomes a little bit more complex, and as you get better at doing it, you'll start to write pseudocode that looks closer and closer to real programming code. And what I'll often see coders do, and I'm one of them, is if I have a bunch of pseudocode that I've created, I'll take that pseudocode and I'll paste it directly into my code as a set of comments, and then I have it right there to refer to. And sometimes I can just pull the formulas right out and the variable names right out, and it's right there, and I don't have to flip screens or documents or anything like that. It's just all right there. That's just a handy tip. And as we create more complicated solutions, you'll just see me doing it, and you go, oh yeah, I remember he talked about that. That's pretty smart. Hopefully you'll think that. Or you might think, hey, that's pretty dumb. All right, but there's another piece here that we need to put into play. And now I'm trying to keep in mind that we haven't really formally learned about Visual Basic as a language yet, have we? Which is kind of weird, right? It's kind of like taking a Spanish class and they just start talking to you, right? But I'll tell you what, sometimes that's the best way to learn a language, right? You want to learn Spanish, I'll just drop you in the middle of Mexico City and, with a few pesos, and good luck, go find some food. And you'll probably walk around going, tacos, Pepsi, right? I'm trying to lighten this up a little bit, but I'm throwing you in on purpose because I know that it's going to stick better with you once you learn the formal parts of it. It's really going to resonate. So keep that in mind, okay? All right, so I'm going to be creating some variables, and we haven't learned what variables formally are yet, but you guys watched me do this last week, and all variables begin by doing a declaration, and it's what we call a dim statement, and it stands for declared in memory. We're storing a spot in computer memory where information is going to reside. Now, I'm going back to my pseudocode, and I'm looking at it, and it says, get the purchase price. And then notice how I wrote purchase price? Is all one word, no spaces. And then the second logical word inside there, I capitalized it so it's easier to read. That's kind of my convention for naming variables. And that technique is called camel casing. And the reason they call it camel casing is because there's kind of a hump in the middle. The middle letter is tall. So I didn't come up with it. That's what they call it. All right. So I'm going to actually copy paste that name directly in. So I'm going to say purchase price. And remember last time we also have to do this. We have to declare what kind of number format it is. I'm going to stick with integers for the purchase price and the selling price. Just whole dollar amounts. Notice that Visual Studio gave me an underline. You're going to discover that when there's something going on with your code, it will underline things and it'll be in different colors. This is a green one. That means it's not serious. Sometimes you'll get ones that are red. Ones that are red will not let your program run. So those are serious. So I'm going to figure out what's going on with it by just very simply hovering over it. And we saw this last week as well. And as I hover, it just says local variable purchase price as integer. And then below it, it says unused local variable. Well, yeah, I haven't used it yet. You're right. But as soon as I use it somewhere else in the code, that underline will go away. Now, the whole point for that, from a conceptual standpoint, is they don't want you taking up computer memory that you don't need to take up. So if you create 50 variables, then you discover that 10 of them aren't being used, you're running this program and those 10 variables are taking up memory that you could be allocated to something else. And it's really slowing your computer down and slowing the software down. So it's just about efficiency. So for now, we know it'll underline. I'm also going to do the same thing with selling price. Same way. So we will buy in whole dollar amounts and sell in whole dollar amounts. Is that okay with you guys? At least for now. All right, so copy those two statements. Dim purchase price as integer, dim selling price as integer. And are you guys discovering as you type how the Intellisense kicks in and tries to help you? Go with it. It's a little awkward at first if you're not used to using that sort of an engine, but there's little tips and tricks to it, and I'll try to verbalize them as I hit them. Like sometimes they'll say, oh, now you can double click, or now you can tab, or arrow down and tab, or arrow down and enter, and then it'll lock things into place. You'll find a way that works best for you, frankly, and then after a while you won't even think about it. You'll just do it. All right, any other thoughts? Any other places where we need to store anything? Yeah, two more I'm hearing, and I think I heard one of them. The one that you said? Profit, that's a good one. But now, profit based on commission, we might end up with a decimal value, right? Is that a possibility? We should probably accommodate for that. So let's do another dim, and we'll just call it profit, and I'm going to just make this all lowercase. And then we have a bunch of different numeric types that we haven't learned about yet. And a couple that are effective in this type of a situation would either be a number type called decimal or double. And what I would recommend in this situation is a double. And basically, that allows for numeric results with fractional answers with decimal points. Integers don't. Integers are only whole numbers. Okay, so profit will be a double. What about commission? I mean, I guess I could just hard code the 2%, right? But you know what? I'm going to teach you that sometimes it's better to actually spell things out, as long as you spell it correctly. And that one also is going to be a double, and commission is preset, right? So at this point, I can actually throw in an equal sign and then just type in 0.02 for 2%. And that way, like when we were looking at our pseudocode up here, and we would take selling price times 0.02, in the code, I'm now going to say selling price times commission. That's kind of the point of using a variable. Notice the commission doesn't underline. That's because I'm already giving it a value. So technically, it's already storing something right off the bat. We'll talk about this in detail in Chapter 3. That is next week, though. Okay? So just be mindful. All right. I don't think we need any more variables. So now we got to do our inputs. Now, if you remember from the fertilizer problem, the way that we get inputs is we will go to the text box that's going to hold the information that the user typed in, and then we're going to take that and store it into a variable. And remember, the other thing that I did up on the board here, which I can't really do quite so eloquently on the screen, is whenever we have any sort of a variable, and I'm just going to type some variable here, and then an equal sign, whatever is on this side of the equal sign, that is what's getting stored in the variable on the left-hand side. That is a rule you can follow in every programming language. The equal sign indicates that what is on the left will accept the value of what is on the right. Don't worry, I'll repeat that many times. Many, many times. All right, so now we want to put the purchase price, right? Or we want to get the purchase price from the screen. So you see I just started typing PU, and right away it went out to my form and it located the object purchase price. It's already highlighted. And I'm going to hit the tab key, not enter. If I hit the enter key, watch what happens. It types it in but drops me to the next line. That's not what I want. So I'm going to Control Z, start typing in PU. I'm going to hit the tab key, and it leaves the cursor right at the end of the word. Isn't that cool? You can also double click it, same effect. So I'm going to say the purchase price equals the contents of the text box, right? This is the thing. The text box called purchase price. Well, if I just start typing TXT, it narrows it down, and fortunately that one comes alphabetically first. So TXT purchase price, that's the one. In this case, I will want to move to the next line. No, not quite yet, and I'll show you why. When I make this statement, and it says TXT purchase price, all it's doing is it's pointing to that box on the screen. But it's not the box that I want. It's the text inside of the box. So I'm going to add to it dot text. Interestingly, text happens to be a property of that text box. Isn't that cool? So what I'm really doing there is I'm finding an object. This is the object on the screen. And then this is the property that goes with it. All right, we're going to repeat that process for selling price. Let's do that. Selling price equals txt selling price dot text. Notice also in the variable declarations up above how the green underlines now disappeared for the ones that are now being used. Are there any other inputs we need? Nope. All right, so we'll get rid of this extra blank line here. And now we're going to move on to the math section. So once again, I'm going to use my pseudocode. I'm just going to look. You know, it's not quite code, but it's real close. It's actually really, really close. And when you, like I said, when you get better with your pseudocode, you'll get to the point where your pseudocode, you can just start copying and pasting it right into your code. And it's kind of like you're completing two tasks at the same time. And that comes with experience. So, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy. You know what? I'm actually going to copy that equation, and then I'm just going to fix it inside Visual Studio. I'm expecting with the copy-paste that there's going to be problems, right? We'll see. Paste. Well, look, it identified selling price. You see how it highlighted it right away? Commission. Well, it's trying to match those two up, but you know what? There's actually a problem here. What's the problem? Okay, I heard two things. Somebody said percent, and somebody said I have a capital C. Excuse me. Now, it is kind of treating these as the same one, but I'm going to tell you what, you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that the case for your variables is exact. You do not want to say capital C on one and lowercase c on the other. Visual Basic, folks, has a lot of stuff that's built into it that's designed to make things easy for beginners. But it's one of the only languages that does that. Most languages are hyper strict. And the reason they're hyper strict is because with the strictness comes power, right? So you want to get into the habit of like being precise, because every other language will expect you to be precise and will be very unforgiving if you're not. Okay, so commission lowercase c on both. It says commission equals 2% times selling price. I see a logical conundrum here. I don't know if you guys are seeing it. Wait a second. I thought, wait, commission is 2%. But wait, really it's the commission rate that's 2%. You guys see the difference? Commission is the amount of money that you're paying. So we kind of screwed up our pseudocode. You guys seeing this? Where am I discovering that? As I'm starting the code. Because it wouldn't make sense to say commission equals commission times selling price. No, this is actually the commission rate. The commission rate is 2%. And here where we have 2%, that's actually what you want to type, is you want to type commission rate. Oops. Equals the commission. So really, here I have now a red underline. That's bad. Because what it's telling me is I'm trying to use something like a variable, but I never declared it as a variable. So what I need to do now is I'm going to go back and add it. So I'm going to come up here to the top and type in dim commission, and I'm going to do that one as a double, because it will have some sort of a, cents after the $, maybe. Okay? Yes. It would be. Okay, the comment that was made here in class is, wouldn't it be easier if I just basically, I didn't have this one, and then just type 0.02 right here? Yeah, it probably would be. Yeah, I mean, it would work the same too. Let me give you the reason for why you might want to consider not doing that. If you were writing a program that was more complex, right? One that maybe had, instead of like 20, 30 lines of code, maybe had a few hundred lines of code or a few thousand lines of code. And then in that code, you had 20 spots where you referred to the commission. And then the commission rate changes. Using the approach where I declare it as a variable would allow me to just change it in one spot, and it would change everywhere in the whole program. That would be the why. But you know what? For a simple program, you're right. We really, technically, we don't need to do it. So if you just did this, that would be okay with me. It would work, and I would be fine with it. But since you know what? Actually, let's leave it like this, and then when we do the more complicated version later, we'll throw that into the mix. Okay? Sound reasonable? Is that freaking you guys out a little bit? Okay, good. Because it shouldn't. It's not really that challenging. All right, so we figured out our commission. Now we need to do the profit equation. And I remember the profit basically is equal to the selling price, which hopefully is higher than the purchase price, minus the purchase price, minus commission. Now, that's an equation that we already verified through our pseudocode. We did the math on it, and we figured it out, and we know it works. We proved it. And not only that, but we had numbers that we put in, and we know what the result should be. And so when we first run the program, that's what we're going to do. We're going to put those numbers in, and we know we should get, if we purchase for 90 and sell for 100, and the commission's 2%, that our profit is $8. So we have numbers that we know work, and then we can test other ones. That's all of the processing. If you haven't saved your work in a while, hit that Save All button. Watch all the highlight thing right here on the side. Hopefully turn green. That's a good sign. Always makes you feel good when it's all green. Right. Finally, we're moving down to the output section. The job of the output section is going to be for us to take the stuff that we've stored in these variables, namely these two variables here, and then put it back up on the screen. Last week, we took that text and we put it into a text box. Remember that? This week, we're going to put it into a label. It's really the same process. What I'm trying to show you is that there's different ways to do it, and neither one is necessarily right or wrong. It's a matter of like, what do you think looks good? So try it. And if you like this approach, use this one. If you like the other approach, use that one. No right or wrong. Either one accomplishes the same task. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to say that in these form fields that we created, the labels that we can't see, these two, remember? Well, what's this one called? The top one is called, oh, I lost it. Top one is called LBL profit output. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my code. I'm just going to start typing LBL PR, there it is, profit output, not the description, but the output. So I'm going to hit tab, and then I'm going to type a period. And what I want is the text property of that label to be equal to what? The profit, PROFIT. Press enter, go to the next line. I'm going to do the same thing with the commission. And I see LBL com output dot text equals commission. Press tab. And then I'm going to do a save all once again. And at this point, believe it or not, I think I'm ready to run my program and test it. So make sure your work is saved. And then when it is, come up here and hit the start button. And then hopefully you'll get your little program up on the screen waiting for you to type something in. I'm going to pause the video for a second here just to see where everybody's at. All right, we're going to go ahead and run the program now with some data in it. So I'm going to type in the values that we already know. So I purchased it for 90. Then I'm going to hit my tab key. Hopefully it goes to the next field. We never did set a tab order, did we? That's in part 2. And then we sold it for 100. Price went up 10%. And then hopefully, if I hit the button, magic will happen. Yay! And we got exactly what we thought we would get, right? The profit was $8. That's what we expected. The commission paid was $2. That's correct. We pre-verified those amounts by doing the math manually. And that's always what you should do. Whenever you're writing a program that's calculating something numerically, you always want to have a way to verify the math. So you have test numbers with correct answers so you know what to expect. Now, some of you may have run into the situation like what we saw last week where your Visual Studio is set with option strict, which is a setting, on, which means it's not allowing you to input the data and convert numbers to text and then back from numbers to text to put back up on the screen. Visual Studio kind of does that automatically in the background. So for those of you that may have encountered that issue, I'm going to go ahead and hit the stop button here to stop the program. And then I'm going to come up here to the stock sale title inside Solution Explorer, the one that's bold. And I'm going to right click and do a properties. What that does is it opens up this window here. And these are properties that are for the whole project, for the whole program that we're writing. And the tab that we're interested in is the second one on the left, which is the compile tab. See that? And then on that tab, there's a setting that says option strict. It should by default be set to off. And when we start coding in VB, this is where we start. because it provides a kind of a gentle introduction into data type conversions, something we haven't learned about. We haven't even learned data types yet, so we learn conversions, right? But as we move forward, I'm going to have you do your projects with that turned on, because that's how real programmers work. And then I'll show you how to do the conversions from one format to another. So that's going to be forthcoming in the coming weeks. Not for a couple more weeks, though. Okay. But I do want you to be aware of that, because invariably somebody out there who's going to watch the video or be working on it at home that's not in the classroom with us is going to run into this problem. They're going to go, oh my God, how do I fix it? Right. So I want to show them. So for those of you having that problem, make sure that your settings are set just like this. And once again, to repeat the process, I came to stock sale, I did a right click, properties, it brought up this interface. I went to the second tab on the left, and then I made sure that it was set option strict off. If you do change it, make sure that you save the changes, because that's part of what gets saved with the project. All right, folks, this is a completed version of the simple part of the stock sale VB program. All right, and believe it or not, for the stuff that's inside the Unit 2 folder, I'm trying to keep the folders straight, this is adequate to complete the Visual Basic component of that assignment. The thing that you'll be aware of is as we move into Unit 3, I'm going to be taking the stock sale problem and ramping it up a notch. We're going to make it a little more complicated, like what we talked about. And what we're going to basically do is we're going to start taking the problem and making it a little bit more realistic. Because the truth is, when you go out and you buy stock, and you look at, let's say you're buying shares in Apple, right? And you choose the company you want to buy, and then you type in how many shares do you want? I want 100 shares. What's the price per share? So you'll have the purchase quantity, you'll have a purchase price per share, and that would be what compromises purchase price. So we're going to add a little bit of complexity to it, and then on the back end of it, when we go to sell the stock, we will set it up so that you can sell all of it or just some of it, and the program will adjust. Now we have the core part of the program already written, so all that's going to happen is we're going to change a couple things on the form, and then we're going to change a couple things in the code. And it won't be that hard because we've already done most of the work. That's the cool part about it. And that's really kind of one of the key essences of problem solving. All right, folks, this video ends here.